Alright, welcome to the AC Report. I'm Chris Ferrells.
And I'm marking up.
And today we're going to do our version of the top 5 worst and best presidents of history.
So yeah, real quick. So last week we did my top 5 worst and his top 5 best. Today we're going to do the opposite. We're going to find out what Chris's top 5 worst presidents are, and I'm going to grace you all with what my top 5 presidents are. So this should be fun. So why don't we start off with number 5 of the worst president?
Alright, number 5, worst president, Andrew Jackson. So you ask any Native American and they'll probably tell you he's the worst president. I mean, he's famous for the Trail of Tears. He's the founder of the Democratic Party. I mean, the Panic of 1837 also not a lot of people know about, but that was actually his doing. Like, it was one of the first kind of, more of a recession than depression, but he was one of the first economic trials that we actually had to go through, and he was the main cause of it. And he revoked the Second Bank of the United States, which has also kind of hurt the economy as well. And then in 1836, he did an executive order that required us to only use gold and silver to actually buy government land. Some say that's good, some say that's bad, but it definitely, hurt the economy, at least at the time.
It's a fair statement to make. I mean, don't also forget that, can't forget that Andrew Jackson was very bombastic, very crass, rude. At the time, he represented the common man. Yep. He represented the average, hardworking frontiersman. He had to give him, not to give him any slack or whatever, but he had a very terrible life. I mean, the Trail of Tears he did specifically because, if I remember correctly, historically his family was killed by Native Americans. But yeah, no, that's an interesting pick.
Just, very unconstitutional, and I mean, that you'll see that in my theme, like, any worst president happens to be unconstitutional.
Alright, so we're going to start with my, before I get into my top 5, I just want to give a couple of honorable mentions. People who didn't make the list, and this is going to surprise a lot of people, but I have very specific reasons for this. So, one of the reasons why I want to pick this guy is, would have been number 7, but Bill Clinton. Now, I strongly dislike Bill Clinton. I think he was not a very good president. However, personally, I remove the personal aspect out of it, and if you look at in terms of politics, during his the last couple of years of his presidency, from 1998 to 2001, the economy was at a boom. There was record jobs throughout the country, 22.7 million jobs throughout the country, which to this day still has not been beat yet. And there's a lot of other. He cut defense spending, but by cutting defense spending, he was also able, and he raised the income tax on those who made higher money, and it led to more revenue and less spending. So, say what you want about it, but in terms of economics, his policies weren't that bad economically the last couple years. And I do believe that had 9/11 not occurred, even when Bush was president, had 9/11 not occurred, the American economy would have continued to go on the rise. The second person I would put on my list, and again, another surprise, FDR. Now, the reason why I put FDR as an honorable mention is because from the years 1940 to 1945, FDR transitioned himself and America from a domestic policy to foreign policy, mostly because of World War II, which was going on at that time. So I have to separate the fact that from 1933 to 1939, he just did nothing. His domestic policies, which were all terrible. I have to separate that and look at the fact that from 1940 to 1945, his decisions and his appetite for American victory in the war was paramount. I mean, he realized that the English needed help, otherwise the UK would have fallen, and it was widely believed and well known by a majority of the administration that if the UK fell, then we would go into then Hitler would be coming after us next. So with that, the number 5 on my list, my number 5 greatest president. Personally, this guy would be my number 1, but since I have to take the personal aspect aside, number 5 for me is John Fitzgerald Kennedy. So Kennedy, he was in office for just almost 3 years. To me, John F. Kennedy represents what a young, compassionate, charismatic American can be in this world. He had a lot of domestic programs that were very good. He dealt with a lot of issues. There was the James Meredith issue with Ole Miss. he deployed the National Guard because he had a court order, because there was a court order that allowed James Merritt to go to attend Ole Miss, since James Merritt was a citizen of Mississippi and had every right to go to his public university. And there was that whole debacle with Governor Bartlett and all this other stuff. But one of the things that gets me so much about Kennedy is just his ideas for America. And I'm a huge proponent of the space program, and Kennedy was a massive proponent of space. He realized space was how we would get into, how we get to where we need to go and how to beat the Russians. It's unfortunate that he was assassinated, but had he lived throughout his presidency, I think he would have won another presidency, and I think he would have been a much better off country today.
I agree. I love JFK. Even though technically he was a Democrat at the time, I think he'd be a modern day Republican. He cut taxes, big on military.
One of the things that I like Kennedy so much is if you listen to his address, he puts emphasis on, his inaugural address. He specifically says, ask not my fellow citizens, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country. And then he goes on to say, my fellow, which I think is, this next quote, I think is relevant now, considering, Donald Trump and the President of the United States on the world stage today. Another quote was, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we all can do for the freedom of mankind.
Yeah.
And that's something I think that, we're lacking. We've lacked that vision. We've gone away from that vision. But Kennedy is an example. I think any young American should strive, once again, the fathers should strive to model themselves after JFK.
Politically, sure.
Politically, of course. Not his social, not, his personal life. That's just, that's for a different day.
All right. So, my number 4 is actually Woodrow Wilson. I consider him the first proto-fascist type president that we've ever had. I mean, he really is just despicable. I mean, he worked with the KKK. He made violent race riots occurred under him. He caused an economic recession. He suppressed many civil liberties throughout his campaign and throughout his presidency.
Who is
especially Woodrow Wilson.
Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah,
okay.
Especially through his Attorney General Mitchell Palmer. I mean, they worked together to really make sure Republicans, especially black Republicans, couldn't do anything. It was terrible. He nationalized many private industries, which once again is a very fascist type thing to do. He was also, during his foreign policy, he was bullied during the Versailles Peace Conference. I mean, he went in there with talking about, helping out Germany at least, hey, kind of forgive them and all this, and France and Great Britain just ran him over. And it was kind of embarrassing, honestly.
It's true. You have to think about that. That's true. But just to kind of offer a little bit of counterpoint here, you kind of have to understand where he's coming from. At the end of World War I, during the Treaty of Versailles, Germany, I will say this, Germany was unfairly, got the short end of the stick there. Germany was not the ones who started the war. That's the important thing. The people who started the World War I originally was between, the Archduke of, I think it was Austria. I can't remember, but anyway, it was between, the Austro-Hungarian Empire and all of that. So, if anything, it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Serbians and all that stuff. So, I mean, Germany came to the defense of Austria because the German family at the time had,
Bismarck made deals.
Bismarck made deals and all that stuff all the time. So Germany kind of was unfairly punished instead of Austria, who should have been the original ones punished. And here's the issue: the main reason for Hitler's rise to power was because the Germans' economy was so terrible. The main reason why the German economy was so terrible was because of the reparations that were forced upon them by the other nations.
Yeah.
When you considering, a bunch of other, the Austro-Hungarians never faced barely any punishment. And, so I will understand why Wilson was like, you need to be you don't need to be so pressured on the Germans.
I'm fine with him being nice to them. I'm saying, he got bullied. That's embarrassing.
True, he didn't stand his ground.
That's my issue, is him being bullied.
Yeah, no, he didn't stand his ground against the French and the British. And quite honestly, the French and British were stupid for doing that because...
France is petty against Germany. That's forever.
Yeah, well...
That's literally their whole history.
Okay, yeah, well...
And it goes the other way, too.
Yeah, alright. Alright, so my number 4. So my number 4 greatest president, in my opinion, is Abraham Lincoln. So Lincoln came to power in 1860, and immediately afterwards, on April 12th, guns were fired upon Fort Sumter in 1861. And before that, as soon as Lincoln came to power, a couple days after, in 1860, the South Carolina seceded from the Union, and that led to the Civil War. Lincoln did a phenomenal job to keep the ship of state together. He resisted the urge to, at first he resisted the urge to send federal troops and all that stuff, but he realized once more states started to rebel, he realized that, I need to do something forceful. And he sent in 70,000 soldiers to go down to the south and subdue the uprising. You also have to look at he was a big proponent of freeing the slaves, and he was one of his closest friends was a guy named Mr. Blair, who is regarded as the founder of the current of the GOP, the Republican Party today. So you have to look at, Lincoln really cemented the fact that the GOP was the party that helped free the slaves.
Yeah.
And Lincoln was no nonsense. He replaced, I think it was 4 different Union generals before he finally found someone who was right for the job. So that's my thoughts on Lincoln. He was a great president. He did a great job, and
classic Republican.
Classic Republican. I disagree. I do think he could have handled things a little bit differently. I do think he pushed the war too soon. But you have to look at what was going on at that time.
Okay, man. All right. So my number 3 worst president is actually going to be President Obama. So this guy was a horrific economic president and very unconstitutional. He added more debt than all previous presidents combined in one term. I mean, the Iran nuclear deal, he literally gave the guys who were screaming debt to America billions of dollars. He made sure to help out illegal immigration. All of a sudden, you just get amnesty. I mean, he was horrible. He abused and made sure the Department of Justice couldn't do anything about it. Like, states who were enforcing immigration policies were actually severely, either harmed or harassed and stuff like that. I mean, once again, those are kind of fascist-type policies. Speaking of fascism, he used the Espionage Act more than any other president ever. And, he arrested journalists who would speak out against him. That is horrible and horrendous. And, that's another reason why, even to this day, we talk about fake news.
We've also had a president who'd done that before, John Adams, with the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Yeah. Not a fan. Horrible. Going on, healthcare is horrific. He just straight lied to people. He said we could keep our doctor. False. He said we won't lose our insurance. False.
He said that, my main issue with the Obama and the healthcare is how you have to pay a fine.
Yeah, extremely unconstitutional.
And without going into specific details to prove this, I went to go file my taxes. And without getting into specific details, right before I did, I had the option to put whether I had healthcare, and I don't, which obviously I have healthcare, because I do. And what I did was, just to see what would happen, I hit no, and it gave me a penalty, and I lost over half my tax return. Luckily, I had healthcare to begin with, so I was fine. But just to see what would have happened, and to think, I will say this: as much as I critique him, I give him praise and I also critique him. But Donald Trump, with the repeal of the individual mandate, I just can't wait for 2019 because that's when it's supposed to take effect. It's 2019, so starting next year, January next year, the individual mandate of the Obamacare of the Affordable Health Care Act will be removed.
It's nice to have a president to like the Constitution.
Well, yeah, that's true. But my main thing is I don't have to be unfair. People don't have to be unfairly. Don't have to pay a fine and lose half their income tax if they can't afford health insurance. Because even under the healthcare marketplace, which was a disaster, by the way, healthcare is really expensive. But healthcare in general, insurance, I could get into how much corruption I think that is, but that's just something for another day.
You're good. So, in more points, he was a big factor in why we actually lost the Iraq War. Because before him and Bush, we were winning, and it was by a pretty good landslide. And he came in and then just pretty much ruined our army and our whole military campaign there. And then finally, he made race relations in the modern era horrific. Even Gallup polls show that people think race relations are much worse now since Obama. True. He encouraged violent protests. He encouraged protests where if you were just angry, you were correct, and that's really the precedent he left.
Yes and no. I've seen some of his speeches. I've watched some of his conferences and his speeches and stuff like that back when he was president, doing his protests and all that stuff. And one of the things I thought was interesting was you would have people who sit there and would call him out, and in front of everyone, his supporters would sit there and do what they say Trump supporters do now. Would sit there and say, shout the guy down, tell him to remove him and everything. And Obama, I remember specifically doing one of those. Obama was like, no, let him stay. Let him stay. He has a different opinion than us, but that's okay. Now, whether he was doing that for show because cameras are on him, I don't know. But I have seen that recently he has actually, people on the left have critiqued him because of this. But he's come out and said multiple times that, especially for colleges, that you should not be you should not be afraid to hear another person's opinion.
He says that now.
He says that now, yeah, because he's not in office.
Yeah.
But the point is, he is saying that, which I think is, that doesn't, excuse him for
I was going to say,
policy.
He's a bad president.
Yeah, but at least he's, kind of changing a little bit.
Yes.
I will say, I understand why you put him on the list. For me personally, I would not have put Obama on my list. Obviously, I don't think I put him on my list. I gave him an honorable mention. But I wouldn't have put him on my list because I think it's just too soon. Obama's been out of office for 2 years. So it's too soon to realize just how much of an impact his economic policies have had. But I mean, I understand why. He wasn't the greatest president of all time.
Who's your number 3, Ben?
My number 3 is Teddy Roosevelt. Good old Teddy, Theodore Roosevelt. He was a tough, hardened man, hardened by the frontier. And he took no nonsense. He was a big proponent of conservation. He was responsible for making all the parks like Yosemite and Yellowstone national parks today. He was very big on hunting and conservation and all that. But one of my biggest things I like about him, he was also he was a trust buster. So one of the things that he got into arguments with is we talk about capitalism. Well, capitalism has its, as Chris is showing by his shirt right now, capitalism, I will admit, does have has a bad side to it. Crony capitalism, which is where monopolies come into play, in my opinion. Well, Teddy Roosevelt was against monopolies. He took on Rockefeller and destroyed Rockefeller's monopoly, which in a monopoly, to me, there is no other market. Because a monopoly, if you have a monopoly, you control the market. If you control the market, you can virtually do whatever you want, and there's no room for competition or anything like that at all. So to me, a monopoly is the failed form of capitalism. And Theodore Roosevelt was highly against that. He also set standards for laborers like children and others working in factories, which at the time, the Industrial Revolution around his time was in full swing in the United States. So you had horrendous working hazards for children and women and adults. And you have Teddy Roosevelt who came in and kind of set guidelines that to this day are still adhered to, and I think that was important. Also, the man was also very, very popular, very, very pro-military. He sailed around on what he called the Great White Fleet. His best policy was, in one of his most quoted words is, think softly but carry a big stick.
Yeah.
And you have to look at everything he did. Not to mention the guy was a total a complete part of my language here, a complete part of this. He sat there during his speech, was shocked, continued to give his speech for another 10, 20 minutes, and then got into a car and went and left. I mean, It doesn't get more tough than that.
Nice. Alright, so my number 2 for worst president is going to be Lyndon B. Johnson.
Good choice. Very, very good choice.
I'm not going to dig into it too much because you kind of went into it the last time we did this, but once again, just a horrific racist.
Despicable man.
I mean, horrific human being. I mean, the Great Society to this day is horrific. I mean, Detroit used to be one of the greatest cities in America. And then as soon as he came in, and did the Great Society, to this day, is now one of the worst. I mean, it's horrible. He is the reason why the welfare system is so big and why it's so horrific. I mean,
you also have to look at the fact that, Johnson's Great Society turned out to, basically made the African American population an anchor for the Democratic Party for years.
Yeah.
luckily we can see people now starting to walk away from and starting to leave, the Democratic Party, they're African American, and start to forge their own opinions and own paths.
What bothers me with the Great Society is that before all the civil rights and all that happened, black families were actually more together before, like during an actual racist time, than they are today because of welfare. Like that is proven, and that's disgusting to me. That welfare and his actions are making them so dependent on government aid that they refuse to even almost think for themselves sometimes.
I think it's fair to also state that I don't know how you feel. I understand the need for welfare. I understand that there are people who are crippled, handicapped,
Sure,
that
can't actually
work, and I understand the need for welfare. However, the problem is welfare has created dependency.
Yep.
And welfare is like a drug. You keep doing it, you keep getting it, you become dependent on it. And that's what's happened to not just the lower middle class African American population, but a majority of the American middle class population.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay,
right,
so
who's
my
your number two?
My number two is the man from Virginia, the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence, the great Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, what can I say about him? He is just a phenomenal president. He did a lot of good stuff. Because of him, we have the Louisiana Purchase.
Yep.
We added a lot of territory. He also, again, he wrote the Declaration of Independence. A lot of people criticize him for being a slave owner, but he was against slavery. That is well known. He had guiding principles and all of that, and all this amazing stuff.
Yeah.
So he's just a phenomenal guy. He did a lot of good stuff. He was a brilliant inventor. Anyone who sits in an office with a rolling chair, that a swivel rolling chair, or a swivel chair in general, thank Thomas Jefferson for that. He's the one who invented it.
I know that.
Yes, he invented a lot of great inventions, including the swivel chair,
Nice.
which was very interesting. He took the ends of two chairs, put them together on rollers, and just spun it around, and you have that. He was a phenomenal president, and I hate to see people give him so much flack because he was a slave. He was apparently a slave owner, and you have to look at that. You have to look differently at that.
No, I agree. We've talked about several times how he helped us actually free slavery. Abraham Lincoln thanks him personally. He was great for us.
Agreed.
All right, my number one worst president in American history, FDR. All right, now he worked with Democrats and the KKK to make sure Black Americans could not receive any New Deal benefits. That's very true, which is once again disgusting. He threatened to stop the Supreme Court to get his way. Once again, that is a very fascist and dictator type action. He was best friends with Mussolini before World War II, actually. That's actually, the New Deal is literally Mussolini's economic plan, pretty much. And they discuss that all the time. He wanted to perfect fascism in America, kind of just discussed that. The New Deal actually expanded the Great Depression by 8 years, economists have proven. Actually, there's a whole book on it called FDR's Folly. It's actually really interesting. And then
check it out, guys. Check out the book. What's it called?
FDR's Folly.
FDR's Folly. Check it out.
It's fantastic. Good read. And then to go more into this, why I consider him the first real fascist president, because he had a symbol called the Blue Eagle symbol. If you were a business or a restaurant that did not have this symbol, they would terrorize you, harass you, because you didn't support FDR's policies. You know who else used to do that? By the way, I'm not saying they're Nazis,
comparing.
but who also did that was Nazis. They used to do it with their symbol. If you weren't part of that movement, they would harass and terrorize your companies. This is a fascist movement. He arrested journalists as well. Him and Obama are very similar in the way they dealt with political opponents, unfortunately. He threatened political opponents, and of course, why he's really, really horrific, what he did to Japanese Americans and put them in internment camps. That was disgusting.
That was very disgusting.
Yeah.
But you have one thing, and I'm not defending the Japanese internment camp issue. That's a shameful chapter in this country that I hope to God will never be repeated. Unfortunately, the stigmatism against the Japanese after Pearl Harbor is the same stigmatism today that's being directed at American Muslims. After 9/11, the amount of hatred towards not just Muslims in general, but American Muslims. many of which have come out since then. Since I've said multiple times, we don't agree with the Islamic Jihad that is going on over there. They do not represent us. But yet so I would argue that the same stigma that was given to the Japanese Americans is being given to the American Muslims today.
Yeah.
So it was
a lot worse back then, though.
It was a lot worse because they were being
obviously.
put in camps, and thank God. After we found out, obviously, about the Holocaust, we don't want to we don't want to associate internment camps ever again with this country, with any country for that matter.
Yeah.
I just think it's an interesting point, something interesting to point out.
Also, FDR got us off the gold standard. That really hurt our economy as well. He was just probably the worst president for economics by far. I think.
Again, economics and domestic policy, yes. Foreign policy is where you and I probably disagree on. I mean, his foreign policy was. I give him credit for foreign policy. I don't give him any credit for his domestic policy, but you have to look from 1933 to 1939. He focused on domestic issues. From 1941 and onward, until his death in 1945, he focused on the war.
Fair enough.
And he did a lot of mobilization for the war. So,
who's your best president?
My number one is he was a general. He is the only president in United States history to win by a unanimous vote. He's the great George Washington himself, the father of our country. So George Washington is a remarkable president. I mean, every president that we have had, up until even Trump today, everything the president has done is based off Washington, because Washington set the standard. It was Washington who set the standard for most presidents up until FDR having to only serve for 2 terms. It was George Washington. He was a Revolutionary War hero. He was well loved by the people. And early on during, I want to say it was the Whiskey Rebellion. I want to say it was the Whiskey Rebellion. I might not be sure about that, but during his presidency, he faced a rebellion, and he was smart enough to put it down. When he left the presidency, the American people were upset, was saddened by it, and everything. But one of the things I like about Washington is he made a very important statement. A statement that I think we've lost today. A statement that I'm going to repeat, and I think that everyone out there watching should take to heart. When he left the presidency, he gave us all a warning. He warned that the 2-party system would destroy this country. He warned us to beware of the 2-party system, to not let it take root. We saw the results of this. We saw how true his statement became in the 1860s when this country was almost destroyed in civil war. Today, there's still 2 major parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. And both of these parties have such a stranglehold on the American populace that it's nowadays, if you believe in liberal or progressive policies, you're automatically labeled a Democrat. If you believe in conservative policies, you're automatically labeled a Republican. And I've had people all the time come up to me and like, I'm a conservative. I say I'm a conservative. They're like, oh, you're a Republican. I'm like, no, I don't agree with everything the Republican Party does. So I think people need to heed George Washington's warning, and I think his message will serve as a reminder of everything going forward.
Yeah.
So I mean, again, he was just a phenomenal general, very, very well spoken, a gentleman of the highest accord.
Yeah.
So that's my favorite. That's my number one.
That's a good pick. I think the only thing I didn't like about him was he agreed with Hamilton more than Jefferson. That always bothered me. Because Hamilton was, I don't know, not my favorite.
Well, the main reason he agreed with Hamilton was not only did Hamilton serve on his cabinet, Hamilton was also one of his most trusted generals.
So yeah, he was his right-hand man.
Of course, Hamilton, Lafayette, Knox, who became the Secretary of, I believe it was Secretary of War. So yeah, I can understand that a lot of people don't like Hamilton and don't like Washington because of that whole Hamilton issue, but he's still one of the most beloved. He still is one of the most beloved, men in American history. And I think he's a model that every president has strived to emulate.
Very completely.
So,
all right, man. It's been a pleasure. Thank you guys for tuning in to the AC Report.
We'll see you next week.